Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Armchair Athlete. I'm your host Patrick, and on this episode we'll be discussing the NBA free agency, recapping team by team. I'll give my grades on how those teams did. We'll be discussing how some of the teams will look going forward, teams that needed to make big moves and didn't, teams that didn't need to make any moves, didn't, and everything in between, and covering the big moves from the likes of Paul George moving, DeMar DeRozan moving, etc. So we'll be going through that. I'll give my grades on each team. And then following that, we'll be taking a look at the previous AFL round. Round 18 has concluded, and the table's starting to shape up a little bit more into how the finals may look. And so we'll take a look at those games, how they went, and then we'll take a look forward at round 19 ahead. I'll give my predictions as to how that game will go. I'll give my big takeaways from the round just gone, and the key points to keep an eye out for as round 19 comes through. So that's what we'll be discussing today. Let's get into it. The NBA free agency has just about wrapped up. I guess all the major deals have been completed as it seems, and so we're going to be taking a look at each team, how they graded, in my opinion, and take a look to see what they might be able to do moving forward, and potentially how their season might shape up based on these signings. So I've got the NBA website here with all the moves that have been done so far, and this is being recorded on the 15th of July, so if anything has changed after this, that's just the time of your recording at the moment, so it's up until this point. But let's start off with the Atlanta Hawks. So they made the additions via trade of Dyson Daniels, EJ Little, Larry Nance Jr., Cody Zeller, and they saw Sadiq Bey, AJ Griffin, and DeJounte Murray depart in various trades. I find it difficult to not give them a D, really, for this. When you just look at the players they've lost AJ Griffin, who's a good young player. DeJounte Murray was inevitably going to leave, so that was to be expected. Getting Dyson Daniels back is good. He's a young player. They got some picks back, I believe, as a part of that. But then to also lose Sadiq Bey, who I think is a good role player, I think he had a 50-point game, not last year, the year before. Like he's proven he can be a valuable player around the league, and the fact that Dyson Daniels was the only key addition, there was nothing major left. You would hope that their off-season's still not finished and that they're going to make some major trades. Whether Trae Young will be on the move, that'll be the big question. I imagine he won't. I personally expect them to keep Trae Young and build around him and Jalen Johnson and keep that core going and seeing from there. But as things stand on the off-season right now, I can only give it a D, I'd say. Boston Celtics all they've really done is re-sign the players they've got. They've kept their core intact, coming off a championship. It's all they had to do. Gave Derek White a 4-year contract. Xavier Tillman returns on a 2-year deal. They gave Jason Tatum the 5-year max, which was to be expected. And I'll give it a B just because nothing really changed, but it was important they did keep their core together and run back that championship roster, because you could see from the pieces around them that they were clearly the best team in the NBA. There was never a question throughout the whole season. Throughout the finals, everyone would speculate maybe there was another team that could jump them, but in the end it felt like we were just kind of making excuses and wanting to see something with a bit more drama rather than, the team we thought would win at the start won it. But for them, like I said, I'll give it a B. There's not too much really further to comment on it, given the fact they have not really made any additions or departures. They've just kept their core intact. The Brooklyn Nets up next. They've got they re-signed Nicholas Claxton and Trent Watford on new deals, which I think Claxton is a big keep for them. I was expecting him to go to somewhere potentially like a Pelicans. I could see him there really thriving, but the fact that they were able to keep him, I think, is good. He's a good young player who's been around long enough to be able to provide some experience to the team as they look to rebuild. Then they brought in Bojan Bogdanovic, Mamadi Diakite, butchered that pronunciation, which won't be the first time they do that, or hasn't been the first time they do that, and won't be the last, I'm sure. They brought in Shake Milton, And then they saw Keita Bates-Diop leave and Mikael Bridges, which was obviously the big one and the key talking point, leaving to the Knicks. I think for what they got back, I think it was a really good haul. I mean, it was unclear as to what they would actually get back for him, but to get Bojan Bogdanovic, Diakite, Shake Milton, was that 4 first-round picks, an unprotected pick swap. It was like 5 picks because there's another one from the Bucks and a second round. That's big. I mean, it has strengthened their rivals in New York there, but I think the Nets were at the point they just had to call it quits, rebuild, get as much as you could back. The experiment with Harden and Irving and KD didn't work. Just roll it back, rebuild from here and see what you can do. I mean, you'll probably soon find out if, as this podcast goes on and these videos go on. I am a big Ben Simmons defender. I think personally the way he was treated by the 76ers and the league in general was pretty deplorable, in the fact he was thrown under the bus, and when he came out with mental health issues, he was basically accused of lying and just ridiculed for it. I think the concerns about his ability to stay fit, I think, are very valid. He hasn't stayed on the floor, but I think when it came to his mental health side and the fact and the screen he caught for that, to me, just wasn't fair. And as someone who suffered with their own mental health issues, just seeing that, I could relate to how he was feeling. And I don't think people, especially the media on TV, understand that how much they say, especially when it comes to these things, can impact the people listening. So I will always hold out hope he has a big rebound season next year, and he doesn't need to return to that all-NBA level that he seemed, or that he once was, but if he can just get back playing and healthy and being a solid contributor, then I think that'll be big for him, because just the last few years have been really tough, and we'll see where it goes from there. But Charlotte Hornets, F. If you bring back Miles Bridges and keep him in the league, to me, that's an F. After everything's done, that's all. Like how sports teams and NBA teams can just, in particular, as it happens frequently with them, and I'm sure we'll get to it when we get to the Clippers, how they can allow these players who have done such despicable acts to just keep in the league and keep earning so much money. Like basketball, yeah, and sport, it's fun, it's important for us as fans. We love to get involved, but it's not more important than the welfare of others, and the fact that their actions seem to get swept under the rug and forgotten is not something I'm okay with. So the fact they brought back Miles Bridges, just automatic F. Chicago Bulls, next up. This was expected to be a big off-season for the Bulls, and it feels like it has been and hasn't been. They've been in this weird kind of, they haven't got rid of Zach LaVine yet, but DeMar DeRozan and Alex Caruso have, so where are they kind of sitting? It just seems as though Zach LaVine maybe just isn't as wanted as he previously was around the league, and that's been their issue in trying to move him, from trying to get what they deem value. But all in all, they re-signed Patrick Williams on a 5-year deal. I think that's good. I think he's an important piece they want to try and keep building around. I don't know he'll ever have all-star potential, but I can see him being a decent 3-and-D role player. They brought in Chris Duarte, who's been good in previous years. I think of that first rookie season with the Pacers, I think that was really impressive, and I'm sure he can continue as he gets more game time and more opportunities in Chicago with a bit less pressure to make finals, as I think they'll, or make the playoffs, as I think they will likely be outside, and they might scrape the play-in, because it seems as though the Bulls always just finish 10th and they'll be around 50-50, and that'll be that. But I think he'll have some opportunity to flourish. Jalen Smith brings in a 3-year deal. I think that's a really good signing. He's a good young player. He provides spacing, can rebound. I think that's something that will be really good for them, and I think a lot of other teams, especially, he was someone that I wanted the Lakers to potentially try and pick up. I felt like he could really, him at the 5 with AD at the 4 for some moments throughout the game could really provide an option, or vice versa. I think him off the bench, I think, would have been a really good addition, but the Bulls were able to get him. I think it's a good piece to build around. And then Josh Giddey, they brought in. I don't know what to think about Josh Giddey as a player or as a person. I try and put my Australian bias aside with it because obviously there's still despicable Australians. There's no defending that. His situation was so weird and it felt like it never really came out what happened. It was very clear there was something wrong, some misdoings, but then it was a case of, well, my understanding was it was like they met at a bar and he thought she was 18 based on the fact it was a bar. Very confusing. So I'm just going to assume for the purposes of this there was no wrongdoing and kind of hope there wasn't, and that it was all above board as much as it could be, but it is that kind of unsettling, uncomfortable feeling related to it. As a basketballer, like all Australians, it feels like we just don't shoot. We can't shoot. You look at Matisse Thybulle, you look at Ben Simmons, you look at Josh Giddey. Did Paddy Mills just take all the shooting ability in Australia and that was it? Because he seems to be good elsewhere on the floor. Like, he's a really good playmaker, but when you can't shoot so badly, you're just a liability out there, especially at the guard position. It's not like you're a center, you can still get rebounds, you can still defend up there. Like, you have to stay in the league when you can't shoot that bad. You need to be outstanding at multiple other facets, and I think hopefully with some more, or a bit with less pressure, more opportunities in Chicago, that will see him be able to really flourish as a player, I should say, and then we'll see how that goes out. But it'll be interesting, the Chicago Bulls this season. Then they moved on from Alex Caruso to the Thunder, which was amazing for the Thunder, and we'll get down to that. But DeMar DeRozan to the Kings, you probably could have given me 15 guesses as to where he would have ended up at the start of the off-season. I still wouldn't have guessed the Kings, but I think that'll be good for them. And once again, we'll get to that when we get down there. But I think it was just time they moved on. And the same with Drummond was just, I think it was a bit part player. He was always going to try and go back to a contender to try and get the ring, which he did with the 76ers. But I think overall, I'll give them a B-. Start introducing plus and minuses now, may as well. I'd say a B-. I think they've done well. It'll hinge on what they can get back for Zach LaVine. I think that will be the big point, and going from there. So it'll just be interesting to see how it all turns out, but I'll give the Bulls a B-. Cleveland Cavaliers, all they've done is re-sign Donovan Mitchell, so I'll give them a B because Donovan Mitchell needed to try and keep him, and I think that'll be big. And so if it is that they end up trading him later, then I think that's fine, because I think now he's re-signed, they'll be able to get quite a fair bit back, so that'll be interesting. But as things stand, that's all the Cleveland Cavaliers have done. Dallas Mavericks didn't bring anyone back. Brought in Quentin Grimes, who I think is good. Brought in Najee Marshall, who I think will do well for him. Obviously, the big one was Klay Thompson coming in to provide that spacing. And then they lost Josh Green, Tim Hardaway Jr. and Derek Jones Jr. I'm going to give them a C-. I just think Derek Jones Jr. was so important to them when, in that lead up to the finals, they relied upon him so much with his defensive work and his three-point shooting. To lose that when you've got someone like Luka and Kyrie who aren't known for their defensive work, although Kyrie was much improved in the playoffs, and so hopefully he's able to keep that going next season. But I think Derek Jones Jr. is such a big loss. Tim Hardaway Jr. I don't think is that massive a loss. I think they probably would have ideally kept him, but I think Quinn Grimes will be a good replacement, good backup off the bench. And I think the fact that he didn't have a great time with the Pistons, so I think they'll just be hoping he gets back to his Knicks form prior to, it wouldn't have been last season, but the season before that. I think that's what they'll be hoping he gets back to, which is definitely possible given the fact he is a young player. You can see that him getting back to that and growing and learning, especially under the likes of Jason Kidd as a coach and playing with Kyrie and playing with Luka. I can see that being really beneficial. Klay Thompson being the big one. I think he'll be really good for them. I just have concerns over his defensive abilities now. I think just his defensive abilities, given his age, I think they've just waned a bit from prime Klay Thompson. And so having the likes of Luka, then Kyrie, then Klay, who's your point of attack defender within that? Are you just hoping Kyrie keeps his form from what it was pre or post playoffs, or during the playoffs, I should say? Is that what you're hoping for? Is that sustainable as Kyrie is getting older and it's not something he's done regularly throughout his career? Or are you hoping Klay gets back to pre-ACL and Achilles injury Klay, which feels like an even bigger ask for someone to get back to that? And so they'll be able to shoot the lights off the ball, but they'll be an entertaining team to watch, but it looks like their games will end up 150 to 145, and as they're not going to have anyone to stop them. So it'll be interesting, I think, but I think it's a C- is my overall grade for the Dallas Mavericks. Denver Nuggets, it feels like they've got an unfinished off-season. It's expected they'll likely need to move the likes of Michael Porter Jr. just to ensure they try and stay below that second apron. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. All they've really done is they signed Dario Saric to play some backup minutes. They lost Reggie Jackson, and they also lost KCP. KCP is a massive loss to them. I think they'll really struggle to lose KCP and Bruce Brown in back-to-back off-seasons. I think will hurt them. And it seems as though they've gone from a team that struggled without any depth in the playoffs to just have lost more depth. So going to hope for their sake that they've got a plan and that maybe some of the young guys, the likes of Christian Brown, are able to step up further. But I think at this stage, I'm probably just going to give it a D. I think they've not brought anyone substantial and they've lost KCP. I think that is a big loss as things stand. So I think that's where we're going to sit for now. Detroit Pistons, they signed Kate Cunningham to the 5-year max. That was to be expected. They were always going to do it for the number 1 pick, and he's a really good player. They brought back Fontecchio on a 2-year deal. They brought in Malik Beasley on a 1-year deal, Tim Hardaway Jr. via the trade, as we spoke about earlier, Tobias Harris on a 2-year deal, Wendell Moore Jr. and Paul Reed. And then they lost Taj Gibson, Quentin Grimes and James Wiseman. C. I mean, they were very much just bringing in names because there was a salary floor they had to meet, and it felt like they were just giving out contracts to make sure they met that. They didn't lose anyone I think is massively important for them. James Wiseman didn't quite work out how they hoped, and they've got a ton of depth at the centre position. Quinn Grimes didn't quite work out either, but I think once again, with the likes of Kate Cunningham and Jaden Ivey, they'll be okay to replace that. Taj Gibson's going on 40 now. I don't think he was expected to play big minutes, so that's not too big of a loss. I think their big goal for this season is just to hope their young players are getting better and that they can have an improved season after their diabolical, September or October was it, that they lost 27 or 28 straight games. I think they did start to improve and they did get a bit better, which, I mean, there was a low bar from that, so they had to, but I think they were at least a bit more competitive, and they'll be hoping that's a bit more their baseline going forward into next season. They can start working their way up, because I think they've been rebuilding for a while, and it's about time they really started trying to push for the playoffs and trying to compete for at least the play-in to make some progress. So I'll give it the C. There's nothing overly standing out there. Golden State Warriors, they have brought in Kyle Anderson on a 3-year deal. Buddy Hield joined. D'Anthony Melton joins. Landy Waters III joined. They then waived Chris Paul. They lost Dario Saric and they lost Klay Thompson. Big to lose Klay Thompson. I always expected he'd be a Warrior for life. I did expect that he was going to join the Lakers. I thought that he would just go there, given his dad's history with the Lakers. I understand where he was coming from when he said that going to the Lakers is a bit like just staying at the Warriors. It's not really a fresh challenge. So that made sense to me, and I can see his reasoning there. But I think he'll be a big loss for the Warriors, who, in the way that they just have such a complex system, Steve Kerr runs quite a lot of sets, there's a lot of off-ball movement that Klay Thompson's known for. We know shot for shot, Buddy Hield can keep up with Klay, but will he be able to match that movement and provide that side of things? And then who's their defensive anchor outside of Draymond on that guard position? What are they going to do there? So is it hoping AirPods steps up and starts and is able to be that? But it feels like it's a lot of kind of just swapping like for like. There's not necessarily been a big improvement from the Warriors. I don't think they're much worse. I think the continuity issue will be there, but I think there'll be a lot of C's, I'll be honest, in this grading. There's just a lot of teams who I feel like have kind of just done that like for like replacement, so I would give them a C as well. Houston Rockets brought in AJ Griffin and re-signed Aaron Holiday. Give that a B. AJ Griffin's a good young player, so I think that makes sense to bring him in. And whether he'll get game time, I'm not sure, given they've got Cam Whitmore, Jalen Green, Freddie's still there, Dylan Brooks is there. Like, where will they get those minutes? But he's a good young player, so that can't hurt to be on the team. Indiana Pacers. They brought back Pascal, which had to be the big thing they did this offseason. That he was a big part in them getting better, I think. I think just having that extra experience in knowing what it takes in the playoffs and really helped them definitely in the locker room to make the conference finals run that they did. And so I think that's then important that they brought him back, especially there would have been a lot of talk and a lot of other teams that would have been vying for him. So I think that's massive for them to be able to do that and really make that move. They brought back Obi Toppin, who I think is good. I think having someone with his aerial ability when you've got a playmaker like Tyrese Halliburton, if nothing else, will keep you entertaining. So I think that's good for him, and I think he'll continue to develop, because while they made the conference finals, that won't be their expectation next year. They'll just try and get back in the playoffs again, keep trying to compete and keep having their young guys get better. I think will be their big goal going forward. They then brought in James Wiseman, who I think is just there to be a backup center, and I think he can definitely play that role backing up Miles Turner, but nothing too exciting. And they lost Jalen Smith, who I think I spoke about earlier, is a good player, and it's a shame to lose, but they do have a fair bit of depth at that position now. So between Obi Toppin and James Wiseman, Miles Turner, Pascal Siakam, they can fill that void, I think, as they look to try and get back to competing in the playoffs. The Clippers, they brought in Kevin Porter Jr., so baseline of what I said earlier applies to him. Or what I mentioned about Miles Bridges applies to him. Outside of that, they brought back James Harden, brought in Mo Bamba, Nicholas Batum, Derek Jones Jr. I think is a good pickup. But they lost Paul George, they lost Mason Plumlee, and they lost Daniel Tice. I think they've just gotten much worse by losing Paul George. Frankly, Kawhi's amazing when he plays, but you can't rely on him to stay fit. I think and so Paul George was that one constant. From what I've seen, it's expected that maybe Russ will move on too, and so from there, who knows? But I think it's good they've got Harden and Kawhi, and if they can both stay fit, they'll be a competitive team. They're two great players. There's no doubt about that. And then Derek Jones Jr. is a good backup to try and replace that Paul George, but he's nowhere near the level of Paul George. And then Mo Bamba can play backup minutes. Nicholas Batum's a steady head with experience. But as the West continues to get better, I don't know they've made enough of progression to think that they'll be a real contender next year. I just don't see them at that level. And so I think we'll just have to wait and find out, but I can see them sliding this year. My beloved Lakers brought back LeBron, which was always going to happen, and signed Max Christie to an extension. I'm glad Max Christie's brought back. I think he was underutilized by Darvin Ham, but and I'm sure JJ Redick will be able to find the use for him. He was that bit of a 3-and-D option for us, and hopefully he keeps progressing. We lost Taurean Prince, who copped a lot of the flack for, I think, in a way, on behalf of Darvin Ham. It was just as he was seemingly his favourite, so I think that was always tough for him, but I do think he was someone who was good to be in the team. But I guess when we've brought in Dalton Connect and Bronny, hoping to give Max Christie minutes, I think Taurean Prince is, it's not surprising he left. But then they've done nothing else outside of that, and as a team that made the play-in and lost in the first round, which, while it was to Denver, who have been the Lakers' bogey team, I just think they need to do more. You need to support the new head coach and really show him you're behind him and make some moves. And there's a lot of talk saying that they were going to do all these things, but they don't have many assets to trade, and they've not done anything in free agency, and all the big free agents have gone. So what is Rob Pelinka's plan at this point? What are they thinking they can do? Memphis Grizzlies haven't done anything, so I guess I should give a grade. So yeah, Clippers was an F because of Kevin Porter Jr. Lakers D, them not doing anything has been a big detractor for them. Grizzlies, I'm giving a C because they haven't done anything, but that makes sense. They lost Jar for most of last year. Desmond Bain had injuries. Jaren Jackson Jr. was injured a lot of the time. I think they're just going, do you know what? We were really good. We lost Jar, had some injuries. This was a step back, but we're just going to step forward and play with the team we know and go from there and get back to when they were a 2 seed. I don't know they'll get that high, but I can see them being towards the top of the West once again. So they'll get a C because I think that was kind of to be expected. Miami Heat, they've re-signed Bam Adebayo, Thomas Bryant, Haywood Highsmith, Kevin Love. They brought in Alec Burks, who'll be good for them, and they lost Caleb Martin and Orlando Robinson. C+, they brought back Bam Adebayo, which was always to be expected, but I think it is really good for him. I think Kevin Love is a good experience and a good backup to Bam. Alec Burks will be a good point guard. I'm sure, knowing the Heat, they'll somehow turn him into some all-star, as they always seem to turn stars or players from obscurity into stars. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes there. But I think it's a C+. It'll be, all the questions come from, will they end up trading Jimmy Butler? I think that's where the big questions come from. It'll be more in the trade market than the free agency market, where they'll make their moves and see whether Tyler Hero moves and where their team kind of stands. So it'll just be interesting to see how that all plays out, but a C+ at this stage. Next, the Milwaukee Bucks. Okay. Haven't re-signed anyone, but they brought in Taurean Prince and DeLon Wright, a couple of experienced heads, and they lost Malik Beasley, who I feel like played quite well for him last year. He was shooting it decently, but I think they're just going back to the well and going, doing what we have. Dame, we have Giannis, we have Brook Lopez, although he's aging and being rumoured to move on, and they have Chris Middleton, who may also try and trade. That will be their avenue to get better, I would imagine. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But in terms of the actual moves in free agency, I think that's a C-. Minnesota Timberwolves, coming off the back of their massive jump last year where they were really good, re-signed Luke Garza, brought in PJ Dozier and Joe Ingles. They lost Kyle Anderson, who was an important part of their team. They lost Jordan McLaughlin, Wendell Moore Jr., and Monte Morris. I think it's probably a C- once again. I think Kyle Anderson is a big loss for them. I think that does hurt them. But then Joe Ingles would be a good experience for them. And then they just kept the main players, I think, that they needed. Whether Cat stays around and moves with the new owners coming in, trying to stay below the second apron, I think that is a big thing for the owners and seeing where that sits. So it would just be interesting to see how it all plays out for them and what happens. So, but for now, just regarding their free agency specifically, we'll leave that at a C-. All right, now let's look at the New Orleans Pelicans. So they made the big trade for DeJounte Murray, and which I think will be good for him. I think they've still got CJ McCollum, they've got Brandon Ingram as things stand. So the fact they were able to get DeJounte Murray without Brandon Ingram was really surprising. It seems as though that was going to be that swap, potentially even straight swap was the way it was potentially going to look. But the fact they got that trade without losing him, I think, is big. And then they've obviously got Zion, who they'll be hoping for a big season and a fit season, I think, and healthy season from him, I think, is the biggest thing they're after from him. But then outside of that, they brought in Daniel Tice, I should say. They lost all those players in the trade with the Pelicans. So they lost Dyson Daniels, who is a good young player, and I think is a bit of a loss for them, but isn't make or break. I do think they'll still be able to replace his minutes, as I think they're at that point where now they just want to compete. They want to try and build up. They've done their real rebuild, so they want to compete. They lost EJ Liddell, they lost Najee Marshall, they lost Larry Nance Jr., they lost Cody Zeller, and they've also lost Jonas Valanciunas. So the tough thing with this is who is going to play center for the Pelicans. Are they just hoping Daniel Tice takes those minutes? What are they going to do? Is Brandon Ingram still going to be moved? And maybe the center position is where they're going to try and fill that gap in. But that'll be the question for them as going forward before that season starts. But overall, regarding the off-season free agency so far, I will give it a B+. I think DeJounte Murray will be really good. I think Dyson Daniels is a bit of a loss, but just there's still the holes in their team. I think I'm just going to give it a B+ for now. New York Knicks, they're getting an A+. I'm saying it now. They brought back Anunoby. They brought back Jalen Brunson, who took a massive pay cut, which I respect the team loyalty, but it feels dumb, with all due respect to him. I think to basically turn down $100-something million, I think is a very big call, but credit to him for showing that loyalty and really wanting to try and help the Knicks get over that line. And I think if they do, he'll be first in line to be getting a statue, you'd imagine. And then they obviously brought in Mikal Bridges, as we spoke about earlier. They've got Keita Bates-Diop brought in as well to play some backup power forward minutes, I would imagine. And then they lost Bojan Bogdanovic, Alec Burks, Diakite, Hardenstein, who I think is a big loss for them. I think he'll be really missed in that side. I think he's been really good. And then Shake Milton as well. But having a lineup with Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, Anunoby, Jalen Brunson, and then Mitchell Robinson, that's a dangerous starting five. They've got everything you need in that side. They've got the defense and the point of attack defenders. They've got the shot creation. They've got the 3-and-D defenders. They've got some size in there as well. So it'll be interesting to really see how they stack up a New York Knicks, Boston Celtics playoff series in the conference finals. Would not be one to miss. I think early prediction, I would say that's where I'm imagining this season's going to end up, but we'll have to see. So they'll get an A+. I think their team's unreal, and I think the biggest thing is not that they've just gone, who are the biggest names we can get, which the Lakers often do. They've gone, how do we get the best fit? And I think Mikal Bridges was a massive piece of that. I think OG Anunoby's another big piece to bring back with that. And then the chemistry with the Villanova boys, I think, will be really good for them. So they get an A+. OKC, I wouldn't say they quite get an A+. I'll give them an A-. I think Alex Caruso is a massive addition. I think Isaiah Hartenstein will be really good for him. He brings in that rebounding that they were missing last year. That was the biggest thing they struggled with. That was one of the reasons why, although the Thunder were a better team last year, that the Lakers would often be able to get the win over them. They had that rebounding advantage with the likes of AD and LeBron. So having Hartenstein either backing up Chet or playing next to Chet, I think will be really good in being able to improve in that facet of the game. Alex Caruso is an absolute menace on the court in the best way possible. His defensive work is nearly unrivaled. I think that'll be a big thing for the Thunder to have. So between him and Lou Dort, I think will be big. I think losing Josh Giddey is, I think, good for them on the court just because he does limit them so much with that lack of spacing, and then it's a case of he was expected to be part of their young core, and with that, and then how can they go from that to then having Alex Caruso, or what were they going to do? So I think, pretty much swapping Josh Giddey for Alex Caruso just straight up, I think is a big thing, and I think it's really good deal for them. So I'll give them an A-. And they also brought back Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins, who are good depth pieces. All right, now we take a look at the Orlando Magic and they brought in KCP, which, as I spoke about earlier, I think will be a good addition to them. I think that experience when they've got such a young team, I think he can help that. He's got championship pedigree, and I think as the Magic are at that stage where they've got their young core. They've got France, who they brought back on the extension. They've got Paolo, who the number one pick, who was an all-star. They've brought back Jonathan Isaac, who's a big defender. Now they've got that young core. They're just looking to move into that more competitive realm and try and compete towards the top. So bringing someone with championship pedigree, with that experience to play that 3-and-D role, I would imagine coming off the bench, but we'll see how that all plays out for them. He may start, he may come off the bench. I think that'll be a big addition for them. And then they also brought back Goga Banatze, Gary Harris, and Moritz Wagner. So I think they're all big returns, in addition to the aforementioned Jonathan Isaac and Franz Wagner returns. And then they lost Joe Ingles, who was an end of the bench rotational guy, I believe. So that's not too big of a loss for them. I think it's probably a B+ for them. I think KCP is a big addition, and then bring back the names they needed to bring back. I think keep that continuity going, keep that growth for them, and then go from there. The 76ers, they brought back Kyle Lowry, they brought back KJ Martin, signed Tyrese Maxey to the extension that we all kind of thought he would. Kelly Oubre was brought back as well. And then they added Andre Drummond, Paul George, Eric Gordon, and Caleb Martin, and then lost Nicholas Batum, Mo Bamba, Buddy Hield, Paul Reed, and Anthony Melton. So from that, they, again, just a flat A. I think Paul George is a massive addition. I think Andre Drummond as a backup is really good for them. Paul George playing that third-star role is perfect for him at this stage of his career. I think he's an unbelievable player, and he can go anywhere from your first option to your third option any given night. I think that's a massive advantage to them, and then that being that not having that same responsibility they had in the playoffs, I think is big. That their issues will come down to health. I think next season, Paul George has struggled with injuries in his later time, also his Clippers part of his career. I think Joel Embiid just can't stay healthy, especially when it gets to the playoffs. So I think that'll be their big issue. But bring back Tyrese Maxey was always a given, and then they've added some good depth pieces around Paul George, the big addition for the off-season. The Phoenix Suns have brought back Bol Bol, Damian Lee, Josh Okogie, and Royce O'Neal, and then they've also brought in Monte Morris and Mason Plumlee, but they lost Drew Eubanks and Eric Gordon. Flat C, they were hamstrung with their big three in terms of what they can do. That nothing here is overly exciting. Royce O'Neal, Josh Okogie are good backups. It's always interesting to see Bol Bol and Kenny get to the level that we all kind of hope he would, being that sort of precursor to Wemby in that mould. And then Monte Morris is a good backup, same with Mason Plumlee. So they needed some depth. They've slightly added it, I guess, but they're gonna. For them, it all comes down to that big three. Let's face it, whether KD, Booker, and Bill can carry them to where they want to be. Portland Trail Blazers, all they've done is traded Malcolm Brogdon for Denny O'Dea. I think I mean, good trade for them in terms of they've got in Denny Adair, who's a good young player. There's rumours around Jeremy Grant possibly moving on. I know the Lakers have been rumoured with him. But I would have thought they might have gotten more back from Malcolm Brogdon, just because, I mean, it might be personal. I just do rate Malcolm Brogdon really highly. I think he's that experienced point guard that a lot of contending teams could really do with, because he's just solid, reliable. You know you're getting at least a 7 out of 10 performance every night, and I think that can sometimes be really underrated for players. But Denny Adair is a good young player, and so they'll just add him into their core as they continue rebuilding. But I'll give it a B-. I think good young player. We're able to get it with by just moving on Malcolm Brogdon, who was expected to move anyway. Sacramento Kings, they re-signed Alex Len. They re-signed Malik Monk on a 4-year deal, which is really good for them. They brought in DeMar DeRozan, Jalen McDaniels, and Jordan McLaughlin, and then they lost Harrison Barnes, Chris Duarte, Davion Mitchell, and Sasha Vezenkov. I used to really pride myself on my pronunciations, largely due to when I played FIFA so often. I felt like I would be really good at pronunciations. I've clearly lost that skill. But the Sacramento Kings overall, I'll give them a B+. I think DeMar DeRozan's a really good player. De'Aaron Fox and DeMar DeRozan in the clutch, that's going to be really good. Struggles a bit with their spacing, but I think DeMar DeRozan and the rest of the team, I think they'll be able to make it work. I think DeMar's a bit more flexible than a lot of people kind of give him credit for and being able to fit in. So I think it's really good, and just lightens the load a bit on Sabonis and Fox to really flourish and take some of that ball handling skills or ball handling responsibility away from them, and so that DeMar can take that load and kind of alternate it a bit. And then we've got the likes of Malik Monk potentially coming off the bench or starting that 2-guard. I think they'll be a really dangerous team, and they needed to make a big improvement so that they could try and get back to where they've been a couple of years ago when they were that 3 seed, and then they saw that dip, and the West is only getting stronger. So I think it's a case of they need to make a bit of a pretty big move, and I think DeMar will really help him out. So I'll give him a B+. San Antonio Spurs, they brought in Harrison Barnes and Chris Paul, and they lost Devontae Graham. I'm giving him an A just because I think they brought in an experienced point guard who be there to just feed Wemby the ball, who be able to teach Wemby everything he needs to know, and I think that'll be invaluable. So it's an A in the way they're helping their future, not next season, but going forward. I think the experience Chris Paul will provide to Victor Wembanyama, I think it's got to be crucial for his development. He saw last year the struggles when he just wasn't getting the ball. When he in the right positions, Chris Paul will fix that and get him trained up. So I'm going to give him an A based on that, and I think Harrison Barnes will likely just either come off the bench and as they prioritise younger guys, or they'll just move him on again. So I think there's nothing too much there, but I think the Chris Paul pickup's really good for the development of Wemby. Only 3 left. So we've got the Toronto Raptors signed Scotty Barnes to the 5-year extension, which we all saw coming. Emmanuel Quickley returns on a 5-year deal, which also no shocks there. Garrett Temple agreed a 1-year deal, and then they brought in Davion Mitchell and my seemingly nemesis, Sasha Vezenkov. If you know how to properly pronounce that, please let me know in the comments below. But I'll just call him Sasha, and I probably should have just done that from the start. But he joined, and then they lost Jalen McDaniels to the Kings. So I think it's a C+ on the pure basis of they brought back Emmanuel Quickley and they brought back Scotty Barnes. I think they're big players for them. I think Emmanuel Quickley is really good, and I think will continue to get better. And Scotty Barnes, I think, has a very high ceiling, and I think I saw it when he was either an all-star the year just gone, or he was on the cusp of the voting. So I think next year he can really make that jump and be solidified in that team. So I think based on that, I think I'll give him a C+, but there was not too much exciting or too much happening outside of that. Utah Jazz brought back Johnny Jazang on a 4-year deal. They brought in Drew Eubanks, and then they lost Chris Dunn and Omar Yurtseven. I think Drew Eubanks was brought in because they need to reach a salary floor as a part of the new rules, so I think that's why it's there. It's nothing too exciting. It'll just be around for them. Do they move on Lauri Markkanen? I've seen rumours, I believe, with the Warriors potentially being interested, so that'll be curious to see what happens there, but I'll give them a C once again. There's just nothing too exciting for some of these rebuilding teams. And then finally, the Wizards. They re-signed Richaun Holmes. They added Sadiq Bey, Malcolm Brogdon, and Jonas Valanciunas. They lost Denny Avdia and Landry Shamet. I'm going to give them a B because I really like Sadiq Bey. I think Malcolm Brogdon's really good, and I think Jonas Valanciunas can be a good addition as well. So when now they'll have, imagine a lineup of Brogdon, Poole, Kuzma, Sarr, Valanciunas, assuming I'm not missing any other high draft picks, which I probably am. Well, they've got Koulibaly, but I guess he'll come off the bench, assuming they don't move on Brogdon again. I think they can be competitive for the play-in, if that makes sense. So I can see them competing with the likes of Toronto and the Bulls and in that kind of realm, for the Hawks probably, if they don't make any big moves in that kind of play-in area. I can imagine that, but it's the Wizards, so I can also imagine them just kind of floundering at the bottom and having another struggling season, and then trying to move these guys on. But it'll be interesting to see what happens for there. But that's been my grades for each of the teams in their off-season. So a lot of C's, a couple of A's, a couple of F's with, I would say, very valid reasons. And then, everything kind of in between. So hopefully you guys enjoy that session. We'll move on to reviewing the AFL round, and that's just happened, and then also looking forward to next weekend and seeing how the league's shaping up as we potentially move, or as we begin moving into finals. AFL round 18 has concluded, so let's take a look at the fixtures, the results that have passed, and where things stand going forward, and see some of the questions as to where these teams sit and what do they need going forward. And then once we've seen round 8 or review round 18, we'll then take a look and move into round 19 and potentially give some predictions over what might happen, some questions going in that they'll definitely need answers, and what do these teams need going forwards. In the Friday night fixture, Geelong beat Collingwood by 20 points, and the biggest question I really have coming out of this is, can Collingwood make the 8 still? I mean, I understand mathematically they can, but as things stand, as I've got the ladder in front of me here, they're currently in 12th with 36 points. They're only a game back of Melbourne in 8th, but there's the likes of Gold Coast, Bulldogs, Port around them. Hawthorn have worse percentage but same number of points, and so it just raises the question of, given their struggles, they've lost 3 on the trot, can they still make the 8? What's their future look like? And I think as we move into the predictions, we'll talk about what that means as they face Hawthorn and seeing how things stand. But I think the biggest question coming out of that was, are the reigning premiers going to miss out on finals? And then following that Friday night game on Saturday, we saw Hawthorn beat Fremantle by 13 points at Utah's Stadium in Launceston. Swans got back on the winning trail as they pumped North Melbourne by 80 points. And then Bulldogs got a couple of goal win over Carlton, which was, I think, an upset to most people as the round stood. I think Carlton, while they lost the week prior, they've moved into the top 4 and seem to be that second best team behind Sydney so far this year. So I think that was a big shock to a lot of teams. And then as we get into those night games, and I will go back and talk a bit more about the questions after we get to the end of the Saturday games, but we saw my mighty Crows, we beat St Kilda by 32 points in an extremely wet Adelaide Oval match. It just was absolutely flooding the pitch there. It was an ugly game. Once it dried up, the Crows were able to handle it, get back on top, but not one for great viewing. Wouldn't be showing new fans that game to really show them what the sport's about. But Saturday was then concluded with a Melbourne win by around 3 goals over Essendon as they continued to seemingly slide out from previously top 4 to now questioning their finals. And I think Melbourne really needed that stabiliser, so that was a big win for them, but they won by 17 points at the G. But the first of those Saturday games that I did mention is Hawthorn took on Fremantle and won by 13 points. And the biggest question I have coming out of this, and it's probably a common theme, I should say, that you'll see throughout these questions, is, are Freo any good? I mean, when you look at the ladder, they're currently sitting in 5th. They've previously been in the top 4. That prior to this game, they'd won 3 on the trot. But they just, losing to Hawthorn, who are down in 13th, and yes, had been on some pretty good form previously, just, it felt like a game they needed to win in Melbourne. They needed to get that win down there so that they could really give themselves a chance to get in that top 4 and really try and fight for that, because getting a home final, even if it's the second chance final, is big for those interstate teams. And so that was really needed. But then it feels as though they've kind of just gone a bit under the radar this year, but then they're prone to just getting pumped by a team they shouldn't, and then winning, they'll beat a team they shouldn't either, and it's just a bit up in the air. And the biggest question I've got coming out of this is just if Freo are any good. I still don't know. 17 or after 17 games played, 18 rounds gone, it's tough to even say if that is the case, and they're currently sitting in 5th, so it's a big question for a team sitting so high on the ladder. The next game was Sydney pumping North Melbourne. That was to be expected, business as usual for Sydney. They needed that stabiliser to get there, and it's no shock that it came at the expense of North Melbourne, who have been valiant in recent times and were coming off a win, but there's a reason why they're sitting in 17th, and I don't see that ladder positioning changing too much between now and the end of the year, but it was good for Sydney to get that win and get that stabiliser. And the question that I had coming out of this game was, did Sydney's dip come at the perfect time? Because you think they lost those couple of games after being so long and just scraping by, and they didn't win a first quarter for ages, and then they just always found a way to come back, and then they get those 2 games back to back, just bang bang, couple of losses, and it was a bit like, okay, we thought this team was the premiership favourite, going to run away from it, and now all of a sudden they've lost back to back games. I believe they lost to Freo, a team just mentioned before, winning a game they shouldn't, and then they lost to St Kilda, which just felt odd for them to win that. It just felt it caught them off guard. You thought, they lost one to Freo. Freo was sitting high on the ladder. Okay, maybe it was only by a point. They had to kick off the siren. And then you get the same thing with St Kilda, but St Kilda are a much worse team. And so the reason I ask if they dipped at the right time is because now they had that reality check. They can now go into finals a bit and build back momentum up to then hit finals and go forward. So I think that's the big case right now as to did they dip at the right time, rather than some teams just saw dip early and need to make a charge, and we'll get to one of those later on in the Sunday games, as to has a team kind of peaked too early, whereas the Suns peaked, dipped, and now seem to be going back up, heading into finals, and the big test will be this weekend against the Lions. And so that's the big question I've got now. Have Sydney somehow managed to time this season perfect to get the points on the board to finish top, dip for a bit of reality check, and then get that momentum back up, heading straight into finals? Alright, I am back after some technical issues with the camera and SD card being full, all the fun things when you're just starting out and getting to learn it. But I believe I just completed the Sydney North Melbourne game, and so moving on to the Bulldogs Carlton game. And so the big question here I had coming out of this was less around the teams, more so regarding the Brownlow battle. I think this is the game between the two contenders at this stage. I know Lachie Neale's potentially making a charge for it, but now that Isaac Heaney's out the running with his suspension, it does feel like it'll be a Bont versus Cripps to see who wins. And I think the Bulldogs game wins here definitely helps Bont's case, and I think it'll be interesting. Personally, I hope Bont gets there, but I think the big takeaway from this game was regarding that and in the battle for the Brownlow and seeing where it comes from there. The next game after the Bulldogs-Blues game was my Mighty Crows, as I mentioned earlier, beat Saints by 32 points. The takeaway from this is just that Riley Thilthorpe is back, and I think it was big to see him get that goal. Big, strong mark, which is something the Crows have been missing this year, as Tex typically plays a bit more up the ground. And so often when he's kicking it into the 50, we don't have someone who can take that strong pack mark that Thilthorpe really can. Fogarty's great, but he's a big hit him on the lead kind of guy and sharpshooter. And so having someone like Thilthorpe to take that big pack mark and really provide a presence, I should say, is really what they've been missing down there. And I think injuries have been a big reason why the Crows' season hasn't quite lived up to the expectations. And while it hasn't been the necessarily number of injuries that we've had in terms of it being you're missing 12, 15 guys and it's a big collapse, it's been a case of who the injuries were to, and our season went off the rails a bit when Rankin got injured. We've lost Worrell, we've lost Miller, we lost Tex at one point, we've had Thilthorpe out. And so from there, I think at one point it was a case of we had 6 of our starting 18 players out, and no team can really expect to be performing at the level you'd want when that's the case. And when the Crows, their expectation was brink of the 8th, that's going to bring you right back down the ladder. So Thilthorpe being back, I think the dream scenario for the Crows is if Thilthorpe could actually be that starting ruckman, then go forward. I think that's the ideal situation for him, to be the Grundy or the Gawn kind of player. And with the size he's put on, who knows where that goes. But otherwise, if he can just really be a big target down forward and take those contested marks, I think that'll be a strong point, a big strong win for the Crows and looking into next season. Following that, the Demons took on the Bombers, won by just under 3 goals, and it's a case of coming out of this like with Freo. Are either of these teams good? That's the big question from this, is who can tell? I mean, Bombers are sliding down the ladder, and then who knows where they'll finish up, because it's tough to gauge. I mean, they look very beatable as proven on the weekend. I mean, I know Melbourne are a good side, we think, but it's a case of they're not the Melbourne of a couple of years ago, and they were missing Petrarca. The Bombers still found a way to mess it up and lose, and we knew the top 4 wasn't where Essendon would finish, but I think to keep sliding in, there's serious risk of missing out on the 8 at this stage. I mean, they currently got 42 points, Porter in 9th on 40, not to mention all the teams behind on 36. With 5 games to go, it's really tough to tell whether Essendon can hold in. They've been sporadic. I mean, the last 5 goes loss, win, loss, win, loss. So it'll be tough to see going into next weekend. They face us, the Crows, I believe that's at Marvel. So they'll be expected to win there, and it'll be, when we get to the preview, we'll see how I see that going and what happened and what the predictions are there. But it's a case of, are either of these teams good? Because Melbourne are only just sitting in the 8 at this stage, and we know they've got the players, but they just don't seem to have that same click. They had off-season troubles with Clayton Oliver, it seemed, and now Petrarca's potentially unhappy and got this big injury, and so it's all a bit of turmoil for the Demons. And I think it's just tough to gauge what the quality of either of these two teams are. But then as we move to Sunday's game, the first one off the bat was the Gold Coast Suns taking on the Port Adelaide Power. Thrilled to see the Suns get the win. I mean, it was to be expected. It was played in the Gold Coast. It was played at home. They don't lose at home, it seems. They can't win away, but they don't lose at home. And I think Port are all over the shop. Who knows what's going on with them? Even Port outside Adelaide Oval, I mean, for both the Crows and Port, Adelaide Oval's such a fortress for them. They're a real tough beat for any side, regardless of where they are on the ladder, both the opponent and those sides when they play at Adelaide Oval. But away from home, both teams do struggle. And Port, sitting in ninth on the cusp of the eight, just on percentage, really would have been hoping to try and get a win here to make that breakthrough. They're going through a turmoil with Ken Hinkley. I mean, it'll be interesting to see where the Port Power can go from there. And then the Suns rack up another home win. The big takeaway just coming away from this game is just simply, can either team make the eight? I mean, can is probably a loose term. It's more of a will. You've got Port, as I said, just outside on percentage. Suns a game back, but with better percentage. So it'll be interesting to see the Suns face GWS next weekend, and the Power take on Richmond. So tough game for the Suns, favourable game for the Power, but we'll get into that preview and see where things go. But the big takeaway is, will either of these teams be able to make a bit of a run and get themselves into that top 8 position? Following that game on Sunday was the GWS Giants defeating Richmond by 24 points. It felt like business as usual for the Giants in the sense of they're expected to beat Richmond. Richmond aren't playing very well this year. They've got their troubles. They've got their aging squad. I think they're in that rebuild phase, which every team needs to go through at some point, and they're just hitting theirs now after so much success in previous years. But I think it's a case of simply coming out of this. The big takeaway is, can the Giants hit some form and get into that top 4? I mean, they've won their last 2. They were really good to start the year. They looked like they were going to be a team that went all the way, but they've then tailed off a bit, and it'll be a case of, can they hit that form and really drive back into that top 4, at least contest for it, and hopefully for their sake, maybe even just get a home final, even if it's not in the top 4, just to finish in that 5th or 6th, get that home final to start. So it'll just be interesting to see how that goes. And that was the big takeaway from that game. And then rounding out round 18 of this weekend was the Brisbane Lions taking on West Coast, as they won by 13 points over in the West. Closer than the Lions would have wanted it, but not shocking given it was Simo's last game, or not last game in charge, but I guess they had his big send-off, I should say, and so that was the big situation for there. So the players would have been wanting to play well for him. But the Lions just need to keep racking up wins. They put themselves in quite a substantial hole to start the year, and now they're climbing up. They look like they're on the brink of top 4, but the big takeaway for the Lions in regards to this weekend for me is, in similar way to the Swans, I said, did they kind of have their dip at the right time? It's almost for the Lions, are they peaking too early? They put themselves in such a big hole to start the year. They've then just had to dig themselves out and go win after win after win after win. And then from that point, they've then just they're going to have to carry that through finals. And I think at that point, when you're going from round 11, trying to go basically undefeated all the way to the grand final, while it's possible, I just can't see a world where the Lions have that. And they don't have the luxury that Sydney had to have that couple of losses, bit of reality check and go again. I mean, they could, and prove me wrong, but I just feel like they might have put themselves in too big of a hole to start the season, that they'll get into finals and be just dead on their feet. And it wouldn't shock me if they get in that top 4 and then it's a bang bang, they're out. It's just how it could go. I mean, they're good at the Gabba, so whoever goes there will have to challenge them, but I can see that just being the case where they just pretty much end up kind of down their feet as finals come, as I said. So I think that's a big struggle for them. And then the takeaway for the Eagles is simply, who is their next coach? Is it going to be Dean Cox and try and spend the money and prime away from the Sydney? What does Sydney then do from there with Justin Longmire's current contract? And I think Dean Cox is running together, so there's no real scheduled kind of overlap, you could say. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But that was the big takeaway for them. And that's been the review of round 18 of the AFL season, and let's now get into the preview for round 19. All right, let's take a look at round 19 of the AFL Premiership season, which kicks off with a Friday night game between Essendon and my beloved Crows. The Bombers will be the favourite, as it is at Marvel Stadium. When it comes to my prediction, I can see the Crows winning. I'm going to be honest, you'll stick around here long enough. As a general rule, I basically always tip the Crows and I never tip Port. That's for the official tipping. I'll probably say in a game like this week when they play Richmond, Port are likely to win, but I'll always tip it. I'll always tip in hope against them and just let that fall how it may. But getting back to the Crows game, I can see a world where Essendon just continue their slide and struggle. I think the Crows will be coming back with a bit of confidence. The big preview, not questions, but what each team needs going into this, I would say, is for the Crows, Thilthorpe needs to play the full game. He was sub last week. I think they need to give him the full run of minutes. He's had a couple of weeks in the SANFL. He's had now a game as a sub. Get him in. Get him to be that big emotional lift for the team. We're not going to make finals. We can have a charge and really try and set the tone for next year as to how things will look. I think the Kane Collins' comments about Tex needing to move on, I think that's a bit ridiculous and a bit premature. I think his experience is invaluable, but I think you need to be aware that Thilthorpe Fogarty is potentially the forward line of the future going forward, and so now's an opportunity to see that and go for while Tex is still there, and having that, you can still keep Fogarty and Thilthorpe playing together and building chemistry and who's making runs where, and Thilthorpe as that second ruck can really be an option, and seeing how he goes there. So I think that's the key point for the Crows going into this week, and I think for the Bombers, it's simple. They just need to win. They just need to get back in the winning ways, try and hit some form again leading into finals. It's in Melbourne, it's at Marvel Stadium. The Crows typically struggle there away from home, so they need it. This is one they just need the points and go. However they get them, just get it done. And there's no moral victories for the Bombers now. I think they're done with that. They just need to get the points on the board. And then Saturday's games begin at 1:45 with the Giants taking on the Suns. And we're at that point of the season where it's just every team seemingly needs a win, barring those few teams at the bottom from, say, the Crows, Saints, Richmond, Eagles and Kangas. Barring those 5 teams, every team just needs wins at this point. And so the big reasons it's just 2 separate ways. The Giants need it to solidify their spot in the 8 and potentially make a charge for the 4. And the Suns need it to try and get towards the 8. And they also need it to break this away from Hoodoo. The inability to win away from home is costly, especially when you're an interstate team. You need to be able to win in interstate, especially in Melbourne, but at this point, the Suns just need an away win where they can get it, and it's going to be a tough game against the Giants, but the Giants aren't infallible, and I can see the Suns potentially, Damien Hardwick really going hard at them throughout the week, and he, as an experienced coach, he knows what it takes, and I think it'll be about drilling it into it. And then if the Suns can break that cursor now and get that win, and then start moving into the next few weeks with knowing that's off their back, and then they get to the next one, if they can get a couple of away wins as well as keeping their home form, that'll be a big step into making their first finals appearance as a footy club, and also then potentially trying to win one as well, and seeing how far they can go there. So I think that's a big situation for them. But yeah, that's the big key points for the Suns versus Giants games going into this week. And my prediction, I think the Giants will just get it done at home. I think as much as I like the idea of the Suns getting the win, I think the Giants will just tick it over, get it done, and that'll be that. Next up is Saints versus West Coast. Absolute snooze fest. I'm not going to spend any time on this, really. Saints will probably win up, given it to Marvel, but I won't be watching it. It's at 1:45. People will be out. I've already said arguably too much about this game. The Saturday afternoon game at 4:35 is the Hawks taking on Collingwood, and this is a big clash because to me, the winner of this keeps their finals hopes alive. If whoever loses, to me, is out the running. They're on equal points, 12th versus 13th. If either of these teams make finals, they're going to have to go on a run, and that starts at this game. You can't lose this game and then start your run. I think you'll be too far gone with the teams around. So this is just a game to keep the finals hopes alive, and because of that, I think the Pies will get it done. I think their experience will stand tall, and I think the likes of Dacos and Pendlebury and Sidebottom, I think, and more will just be able to get it done, and they know what they need to do, and I think they'll just be able to do so. So I think Collingwood win, and unfortunately then the Hawks, while they've been entertaining, exciting, and they've gone on that good run, I think then their final hopes will be dashed there. The Saturday night games are Geelong taking on the Bulldogs and Port taking on Richmond. I'll do Port Richmond first, just because I think it's a bit of a quicker point. Richmond should tank. I think they're in their rebuild. Just tank, try and get a number one pick. Even if there's not a standout guy like there was with Harley Reid, getting that number one pick so you can move into that facet of rebuild and rebuild it around a player. If nothing else, maybe you can trade that number one pick for multiple picks. The trading within the AFL, I think, could be greatly improved to be a bit more reflective of how it works in the NFL and NBA. I think they've got a much better system, much more exciting system, but the Tigers need a tank and just get lost on the board. Finishing 13th or 15th for them doesn't really matter. I don't think it really helps their club too much, whereas potentially getting a number one overall pick can be a difference maker for them. So they should tank, and Port need to win. They need to win and start getting that, or they need to just succinctly be done with it, because if they lose, there'll be more circus, and I think that's just now become a massive distraction for the club, and they just need to be away with it to get it done. And I'm saying this as someone who hates when teams sack coaches too early and without a plan. I think, to me, I'll probably end up making a full video just around this topic, but the fact that teams will just sack a coach and then seemingly make a plan and go, oh, he's out the door, okay, now what should we do? That's wild to me. Just getting rid of someone doesn't always improve. You should know where you're wanting to improve and where you can go from there. But I think there's been so much turmoil over the last few years, and it's the same thing every year. I think Port just need to get the win and start building some momentum for them, or they need to just succinctly be done with it, try and get a new manager bounce and see what goes there. But the Port will probably win, although I really hope Richmond get it done. One, I don't want Richmond to be good, so them not getting the number one pick is better for them. And two, I always want Port to lose. So my hope is Richmond, my expectation is Port. The next game on the list to kick off Sunday is a big clash at the Gabba. The Brisbane Lions will be taking on the Sydney Swans. This could be a very good game for starters. I think it'll be a close matchup. I think Swans will feel like they've found their groove again. I think a 90-point drubbing was just all right, they've got that out of the system, bit of an anger game, and now it's okay, back to business. They know how they're playing, get back on track, and Lions just have to keep this momentum going. They're on the cusp of the top four. Actually, no, they're in the four now. They're sitting in fourth, so now they just need to try and keep that momentum and try and stay in there and try and get that home final, which will be big for them. So I think this game, the biggest points coming out of this game will be Are the Lions real or frauds? I said I think they might be peaking too early. That's definitely a concern for me, but I think if they can knock off a Sydney, I think that says a lot for them and can be a big boost for them. And so they'll really be viewed as a contender at that point. Whereas if they lose this and then they start waning, they'll definitely be ones for the forward watch. And then one thing, the key point for the Swans that Lions will need to be aware of, Heaney's revenge game. I think he's now been taken out of the Brownlow race. There's a lot of disagreement about that being the case. I think he'll be coming out firing. I can see him putting up some big numbers, potentially one to take as many overs on as you can with any of his stats. I think he'll have a big game, and so I think the Lions will need to be cautious of that. And so they're the big takeaways for the Lions versus Swans. I'm going to say the Swans win. It'll be close. It'll be a good game, but I think the Swans will get over the line. I think Heaney will be a big reason for that. I have also realised I said I'd do Port versus Richmond first and then get back to Geelong Bulldogs, and just didn't, which isn't, anyone who knows me knows they wouldn't be surprised. My brain can move on pretty quickly, so I will get back to the Geelong versus Bulldogs game at 7:30 on Saturday night. This one is at GMHBA Stadium, and so quick roundup. I don't think it's a game that does require too much time, in the sense of I think Geelong are hitting form right before finals, which I think is big for them with the experience they've got in that team. We know Chris God knows how to win finals, and with the likes of Danger and Hawkins and Cameron, I think that's dangerous for the teams around them if Geelong are really finding their form at this stage. And so for them, it's about keeping it up and trying to keep in the top four, as they currently sit third. And the Dogs need to win so they can try and get into finals. They're sitting 10th. A loss here would be damaging to their hopes. And I also think a win here in a big game from Bont can really help him just keep momentum going and try and I think, to me, if I was to bet on a player right now to win the Brownlow, I'd be backing Bont. All right, moving into the final couple of games for Sunday, you can see that the Fremantle Dockers are taking on the Melbourne Demons over at Optus Stadium in Perth. So this has been an interesting game, as I think Fremantle will be looking to get back on the winning track and try and really solidify their top four chances and aspirations, whereas Melbourne really need to win the game to ensure they stay in the top 8, really trying to find some form heading in to the final series coming up. And so they're the key takeaways for this game is, can Fremantle get in the 4? Can they hit that form? It's been a long time since they've been towards the top of the ladder, and with how this season's shaking out, where there doesn't seem to be that same clear favourite as there has in previous years. I mean, I know Sydney are performing really well. Carlton have been in really good form. But it does seem as though the premiership is really there for the taking. And so I think it's an opportunity for Freo to really make a go for it and really try and get their first one. So I think that's a big takeaway for this game is, can Freo solidify their top 4 chances? And then Melbourne just need to make sure they get the win, try and keep the momentum going, solidify their spot in the 8. They won't do it with this game, but losing this game would be severely detrimental to their chances. So they need to make sure they win, just stay in that fight, and really keep going. So my guess is that Freo will win just on the pure basis it is in Perth. It's a case of if it was in Melbourne, I would have tipped Melbourne, but I think in Perth, Freo play it better. They're more used to it. They're travelling with such a turmoiled squad in Melbourne. I can see that causing its difficulties, and the Freo really picking up the win. So that's my prediction for Freo versus Melbourne. And then the final game of the round, the Carlton Blues are taking on North Melbourne Kangaroos. I think this is a situation where the Blues, much like Sydney did, will go out, they'll pump North Melbourne, they'll get the win. I expect it to be a heavy win, but I think there's a bit of there'll be a bit of a point to prove for Carlton, I'd say, in this game, and so I think that's what they'll be looking to do, and they'll go out and they'll do it. I think that's so Carlton to get the win here. I think the key points for this game are the Blues need the bounce back win. That's the number one, and as has been a bit of a running theme, and I mentioned it with the Bulldogs, I think Cripps having a big game here can really help his Brownlow chances. Try and get his second, really make that play for it. I think this is one he'll be looking to try and get all 3 votes and put a marker down. And so I think that's his opportunity. And then for North Melbourne, they basically need to compete in all their games, try and make them close like they had been, really try and push teams and show some growth, but don't win. Don't do what you did last year and win a game you shouldn't have and then miss out on a player like Harley Reid. I don't know enough about the upcoming draft class to say there is a player like that, but I think just compete, try and get as high, but still lose is kind of their goal. It's a tough balance, and you kind of players going out there trying to lose even when tanking, but I think it's a case of like their supporters know that another number 1 overall pick, and then you can add them to a team with the likes of LDU and Sheasel and then really form that core that they've really done a good job in building. And then Clarkson being an experienced coach, I think can then help lead them going forward after that. But I think this is a year just try and compete and try and show some growth, but just don't get those wins. Thank you all for listening. That'll do it for today, but I appreciate your time watching through that. As always, please let me know in the comments below if you have any suggestions, any topics you want me to discuss, just general comments. I'm always looking for feedback to see where we can get this growing, get this improving. As you said, just starting out, so any advice and tips and tricks would be very much appreciated, and let me know what more you want me to cover. Keep an eye on the channel. I am looking to try and post some a bit more individual videos. I've got some ideas, like I want to take a look at how Liverpool will be preparing under Arnie's slot and how that looks, and rumours around Liverpool at the time. I'm also looking to make a video that just discusses the individual, or sort of around the coaches, I should say, in terms of, are teams too quick to fire their coaches? And I mentioned it throughout the podcast that I was looking to make a video, but yeah, just our teams firing without a plan and just kind of reacting to the media. So keep an eye on the channel and make sure you subscribed, you like the video, and hit that notification bell just so you stay up to date and don't miss any uploads that do go out. But as I said before, I appreciate your time listening, and I hope you have a good one.